Let's start the sponsors. Year of Learning by Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Labush, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara, Nisan ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend, Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Man, Aleh Shalom, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. The many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel Pinchas ben Arav Shimon, friends of Joe Wolf and Yosef ben Chaim, friend Sharon, and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edel Bas Yaakov. A Month of Learning by Jill and Perry Meltzer, in memory of her father, Yaakov ben Yosef, by B. Pizer, in memory of her mother, Razel Bat Shammai, and her stepfather, Avram Michal ben Shmuel Halevi, by Josh and Carol Sanborn, in memory of his mother, Chiena Bas Aryeh Leib, and his father, Shmuel Aryeh ben Baruch, by Mel and Haran Haller, in memory of his mother, Fega Bas Yaakov, by Andrea and David Dolney, in memory of her mother, Edeltzina Bat Shimshon, by the friends of Bella Silverstein, in memory of Bela Bas Yaakov. Have a Week of Learning by Minnie Shavrik, in memory of her husband, Yeshayahu ben Nechemiah Mordechai, and by Marcus and Arlene Aleh Shalom Tellerman, in memory of his mother-in-law, Esther Bas Nachum, and his father-in-law, Tuvia ben Yosef. Today being the 9th of March, there is a day of learning by Alvin Ribiat, in memory of his mother, Bela Bat Moshe. May Hashemas have an aliyah, Krank Rafia Velti Yashir Hashem Latzliah, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael a good Geben Shtiyar.
Amen.
Okay. I suggested that we continue, since we were a daf ahead, continue, and that this way it will give people a break on Shabbos. Okay, so as a result, we're now going to be dealing with Kaf Tet Amud Aleph. Okay, and perhaps we're going to be getting, again, as we move through the parak, to more and more items that we identify with the Seder. Okay, we saw at the beginning of the top of the Amud that it was suggested, instead of giving children wine, that you serve them dessert first, or you give them a nash during the meal, during the Seder, roasted grain and nuts, okay, so that they wouldn't fall asleep and that they would ask questions. Okay. However, the Gemara is now going to pick up on second line of Kaf Tet Amud Aleph, and is going to give us another interesting aspect of the Seder. Okay. So the Gemara tells us, Amru alav al Rabbi Akiva. They used to say about Rabbi Akiva, Shahaya mechalek klayot ve'egozim letinakot, that he used to distribute roasted grains and nuts Okay, remember almonds was very identified with the land of Israel to the children. Be'erev Pesach, in the eve of Pesach, Kadei shelo yishnu v'yishalu, that they used to not go to sleep and that they would ask questions. So that basically is a incident to come to reinforce the practice. However, the Gemara wants to tell us the following in a Braita. Tanya, okay, Rabbi Eleazar, Omer, Chotfin matzot b'leilei psachim, that we snatch or grab the matzah the nights of Pesach, b'shvil tinakot shelo yishnu, for the children so they don't eat. They don't fall asleep. Okay, so Koren comes up with like 3 or 4 different explanations. Some say that you take the matzah from the children. Others say adults take the matzah from other adults. One is that the children take the matzah from the adults. So the concept of, so to speak, stealing the matzah, afikomen perhaps, I'm not sure, but certainly to do activities that are not ordinarily done at a dinner table in order so that the children won't fall asleep, okay, as well. The new Braita, Tanya, Amru alava Rabbi Akiva. Again, they would tell about Rabbi Akiva. Mi'amav lo amar hegia et la'amod b'beit hamidrash. From all his days, they did not say there was a time when he told the students in the Beit HaMidrash to get up, in other words, to leave their studies early, chutz me'arvei psachim ve'erev Yom HaKippurim, with the exception of the eve of Pesach. Okay, interesting, by the way, notice that they use arvei psachim, okay, plural, and the eve of Yom Kippur. Why? Be'arvei psachim b'shvil tinokot, on the eve of Pesach for the children. Kadei shelo yishnu. In other words, the idea being that as soon as the got dark, right, they would be able to start the seders before the children got too tired to fall asleep. Be'erev Yom Kippurim, Kadei sheya'achilu et b'neihem, and the eve of Yom Kippur, so that they would leave the Beit HaMidrash early enough to be able to feed their children beforehand. A new Braita. Tanu Rabbanan, says this Braita. Chayav Adam l'sameach banav u'bnei beito b'regel. Okay, this is Braita is going to tell us, gentlemen, that we must ensure the happiness of our children and our household on the holiday. Why? Shne'amar v'samachta b'chagecha, that you should enjoy and rejoice in the holiday. B'meh mesamchim, in what manner? B'yayin, says this answer, that you give people plenty of drink. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Anashim b'ra'ui lahem, v'nashim b'ra'ui lahen. For men, what is appropriate for them, and for women, what is appropriate for them. Anashim b'ra'ui lahem b'yayin. For the men, it's appropriate to make them joyful, let's say, through the use of wine. V'nashim b'mai, and for women, for what? With what? Tani Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef taught as follows: B'Bavel, b'bigdei tzevunin. Okay, in Babylonia, one would buy his wife colored clothing. In other words, new clothes. Be'eretz Yisrael, b'bigdei pishtan meguhatzin. And in the land of Israel, they would buy their wives again new clothes, okay, from the clean, fresh, pressed linens. Okay? So, gentlemen, okay, if your wife says, I need new clothes for Yontif, okay, or members of your household says that, you see where it comes from. Okay? Tanya, we have another Braita. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera Omer. He says as follows, and this may still be in the context of rejoicing in the holiday. Bisman Shabbat HaMikdash Kayam, at the time that the holiday, was celebrated when the Beis HaMikdash was in existence, right? Ein simcha ela b'basar. There is no joy except in the meat. In other words, being able to eat from the Korban Pesach is how I would understand it. Okay? Shene'amar, as it says, v'zavachta shlamim v'achalta sham v'samachta lefnei Hashem Elokecha. Okay? And remember, we said that one ate the shlamim, okay, the chagiga, which was like a shlamim, that was and then the Korban Pesach was ate al hasova for the purpose of satiety. V'achshav, he says, she'ein Beit HaMikdash kayam, now that we no longer have a Beis HaMikdash, what do? Ein simcha ela b'yayin. There's no rejoicing except through wine. Shene'amar, as it says, v'yayin yismach levav enosh. That it is wine that helps rejoice the heart of a person. Okay. Now, the Gemara picks up on this discussion, since we've been talking about wine as a one method of enjoying the holiday. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak suggests another alternative. Okay, Kasta de Morisa, Dahava Betzipori. He's telling us that the measure, the vessel that was used to measure the fish brine in the city of Sepphoris, he havat kimin luga de mikdasha. Since we mentioned the Beis HaMikdash, he says they had a special vessel in Sepphoris, Tzipori, that would be similar to the size of the vessel that was used in the Beis HaMikdash. Uba misha'arin revi'it shel Pesach. And on that, they would use that vessel in particular in order to measure the revi'is, the measurement of wine that was necessary to satisfy, okay, the requirement of drinking each cup, okay, on Pesach. Okay. Now, the Gemara wants to tell us further, since we made a reference to measuring. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he says, Timnayata kadmaita dahava betveria. He said the earlier measure, okay, that existed in Tiberias, okay, that was 1/8 of a log. Havet yatira al da rivia. That was more, he says, than the 1/4, the log. Uba mish'arin revi'it shel Pesach. And with that measure, okay, they would use to measure the revi'is, the measurement of wine for Pesach. So in Tiberia, they had one, so to speak, measurement. In the Sephari, they had another. Amar Rav Chisda, says Rav Chisda, however, revi'it shel Torah. Okay, if you want to ask how much was a revi'is, okay, that amount of liquid from the Torah perspective, notice what it says. Etzba'im al etzba'im. 2 fingers by 2 fingers. Birom etzba'im ayim. And a height of 2 fingers. V'chatzi etzba v'chomesh etzba. And the height was then, in addition, 2 1/2 and 1/5 of a finger. Okay, so if you think of, sometimes people used to say, at least in a shot glass, give me 2 fingers worth. Okay, don't fill up the whole shot glass, but just give me that amount. All right, so we might see that this was a common means of measurement. Okay, but that must have been a considerably good sized glass to have not only fill it almost 3 fingers amount, okay, but then to have a internal measurement of 2 fingers by 2 fingers. Okay, so it was a pretty good sized shot glass, I would say. Kidetanya, as taught in the Braita, V'rachatz b'mayim et kol b'saro, okay, where the pasuk says that he washed, right, with water his entire body, namely, shelo yehe davar chotzetz bein b'saro l'mayim. That it says that there should not be anything that's in interposition between his skin and the water. The fact that the pasuk used ba mayim, in the water, what does that mean? B'mei mikvah, with waters that are from a mikvah. Et kol b'saro, his entire flesh, mayim shekol gufo ole bahem. In other words, that there must be enough water in the mikvah to cover his entire body when he immerses. V'kamahen, and how much is that? So since we talked about the minimum shiur for a revi'is, okay, in order to fulfill the requirement of the cups for Pesach, Gemara threw in further discussion of measurements in terms of a mikvah. How much is that? Says the next Amud. Ama al ama barom shalosh amot. Okay. Again, now it's saying that it is 1 amma by another amma with a height. In other words, the depth has to be 3 amot. Right? What happens? V'shi'aru chachamim shi'ur mei mikvah arba'im seah. And then the sages then determined that the amount of liquid in that mikvah must be the equivalent of 40 seah. Okay? Koren had a picture of an entrance to a mikvah, and you could see that the area, okay, let's use just roughly a rough example. Say you had at least a yard by a yard, okay, to go down, and it had to be at least 3 yards deep, okay, right? So that would be what? So 9 feet, all right, roughly. So that would be certainly deep enough for the average person to be able to immerse themselves, okay? It could be that they didn't have to walk down all the steps either, right, to do so, right? Okay. We've talked about measurements for wine cups, measurements for a mikveh. Okay? Now, as a result of that, the Gemara goes on what we might call a side discussion and tells us the following. Amar Rav Ashi, Amar li Ravin bar Chinina. So Rav Ashi now is citing a story, okay? Basically a question, but it connects with a story, okay? In terms of the size of a mikveh. Okay? Now, we're all familiar with the fact as we get into the next part of the Gemara that there were certain utensils in the Beis Hamikdash. One of those utensils was the table for the showbread. Okay? And that table is what we're going to be talking about. And the concern may be that perhaps a Kohen, okay, who was involved in the transition of the showbread from one Shabbos to another, maybe he didn't realize that he was tamei. And aside from contact with the showbread itself, he could have had contact with the table itself. How then, okay, would you purify this table? Okay, after all, if it was large enough to hold all of the rows of the showbread that was placed upon it, it had to be a considerable size. So Rav Ashi now is telling us, Amar Rav Ashi, Amar li Ravin bar Chinina, Shulchan shel Mikdash, that this table upon which the showbread was placed, okay, Parakim hava, it was made of assembled parts. The Isal Gadatach Haduke hava mahadek, that if you thought it was a whole assembled unit all at one time, amata ba'amata, and a mikvah was normally 1 amah by 1 amah, the entrance, hechi matbale, how would it be possible for one to, if the table became tamei, to immerse it in such a, so to speak, small mikveh? My kusha, what's the problem, says the Gemara? Dilma b'yam she'asa Shlomo, hava matbile. Perhaps they didn't use the, let's call it the mikveh for persons, but instead they used the laver, the large washing basin that Shlomo had made, from which all the Kohanim would normally wash, okay, their hands and their feet as well, okay, in the morning. Why? Detani Rebbe Chia, as was taught by Rebbe Chia. How large was this laver? She'asa Shlomo, this laver that Shlomo built, right? Machazik me'ah v'chamishim mikvah tahara. It held the amount of water that was equivalent to 150 of the normal mikvah. Okay? So if we said that a normal mikvah had to have 40 seah, right? So given a little arithmetic, that's about 6,000 seah of water that was supposedly held in that laver. Now we come back to our Mishnah, right? V'lo yifchatu lo me'arba'a. And the Mishnah, remember, reminded us that the custodians of the tamchui, okay, or the plate, the charity, should ensure that even the poor people got enough money to buy 4 cups of wine. Okay? So the Gemara raises an interesting question. Okay? You're saying that they had to have 4 cups, and so it asks, Heichi metakne Rabbanan mide da'ate bali de sakana? How is it possible, asks the Gemara, that the rabbis would have established something that could possibly lead to a dangerous situation? Their implication being that we find elsewhere in the Gemara, okay, the following braita, Vahatanya, because isn't it taught, Lo yochal adam trei, that a person should not eat a pair of items, Velo yishteh trei, and a person should not drink 2 drinks, Velo yikaneach trei, and he should not wipe himself 2 times, Velo ya'atzet sarchav trei, and he should not have relations 2 times in a row. In other words, the whole idea of doing something in pairs, okay, or 4s or 6s, those numbers were problematic lest it result in the influence of mazikin, of shadim, of demons. So it was more appropriate to do items by odd numbers than by even numbers. Amar Rav Nachman, he says as follows, Amar Kra, citing a pasuk, Leil Shmurim. Okay, we refer in the pasuk that Passover night is a night of Shmurim, guarded, protected. Therefore, Leil HaMishumar Ubam Min HaMazikin, okay? It's a night that is protected, and therefore we don't have to worry about mazikin, about shadim, if we drink 4 cups of wine. Now,
I agree. Is that the reason why when they cook eggs, they cook in odd numbers?
A good question. I actually never heard of that, Seb.
My mother always used to cook an odd number of eggs.
Yeah, could be. It could very well be that was the basis for that practice. Okay. Now, Rav is going to tell us, maybe we really don't have 4 cups the night of the Seder. Why? Rav Amar, Kos Shel Bracha. Remember we said that's the cup for Birkat HaMazon, Mitztaref Latuva, Ve'eino Mitztaref L'Ra'ah. That having the Birkat HaMazon cup is, since it's for a, so to speak, different purpose, a different intention, you're really only drinking 3 cups appropriate for the meal, okay? And so, therefore, that's only for benefit and not for detriment. Ravina Amar says, Ravina Arba'a Kase Takinu Rabbanan Derech Cherut. That the rabbi, says Ravina, established the 4 cups for the purpose of freedom. Kol Chad Vechad, each one of them, and we'll go over just a little bit. Mitzvah b'fnei nafshahui. It is a blessing, a mitzvah, a commandment in of itself. Okay, but we have a pasuk that says, "Lo yaseh tzarchav trei." What about the fact that this braita says that one should not have relations, okay, twice at one time. Amai, why? Nimlachu. Maybe one would change their mind. Abai, hachi ka'amar. Says Abai, this is what he means to say. Lo ya'achal trei, that one should not eat two items. V'yishtet trei, and drink two items. V'lo ya'aset tzarchav, and then do his relations. Elapam echat, okay, except only one time, Dilma chalish umitare. Why? Lest the person become weak and harm oneself in all of that. So, Gemara is going to right, then continue with other examples, okay, and of concerns about doing things in pairs, in even numbers, and then it's going to go into some other topics as well. And tomorrow is a little bit longer Gemara. So let me just point out, Tanu Rabbanan, as we finish up, there was a Braita, Shotek Kiflayim, Damo Birosho, that if one drinks twice as much, okay, then his blood is on his head. In other words, he puts his life in jeopardy. Hamar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, Ematai, at what point? Bisman shelo ra'ah pnei hashuk. Okay, that he did not see, and we'll go into that more tomorrow. What does it mean, pnei hashuk? Aval ra'ah pnei hashuk hareshut biyado. And we'll clarify that tomorrow more in terms of how that leads into the rest of the Amudim, the rest of the Amud. Okay.
Unless you want to finish this now, Reb.
What?
Unless you want to go through the rest of the Amud now.
No, I think we'll stop here at this point, because otherwise we're going to start getting into some other items that are a little bit move away from our this topic. Okay. All right. Okay. So everybody take care.